Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Christchurch Mansion and the Wolsey Art Gallery. This has been a really important year for Constable, in particular in Ipswich, and our collection here. And what I wanted to really focus on in this talk was the kind of research and preparation for our year of Constable here, and particularly the bicentenary of the flowering kitchen garden paintings, which are just down there behind you all on the darker green, and their relation to the Great Salisbury here, and the kind of the project itself, and kind of just give you a bit of context as well. So the project is actually called Aspire, and this was a kind of groundbreaking new partnership that was formed between Tate, the National Galleries of Wales, National Galleries of Scotland, and ourselves at Colchester and Ipswich Museums, Salisbury Museums as well, and it was all with a view to being able to save Constable's Salisbury Cathedral from the meadows, which came up with a possibility to be acquired for the nation. And the idea was to be able to save this masterpiece of Constable's, a late six-footer by him, and not just to display it in a kind of static display, but have it very much as a painting that would travel between each of those venues and be responded to in quite different ways. So it wouldn't be one exhibition that goes from Cardiff to Ipswich. It would be very much rooted in the collections there in each location. And then hence, lots of different audiences would be able to respond to it as well. And the project itself, very kindly funded through a number of funders who were mentioned on the first slide, like the Heritage Lottery Fund, the Art Fund, the Manton Foundation, and Tate members themselves, were all very generous funders to the actual project, making that happen over the next 5 years. So last year, the painting was on display in Cardiff, and their focus there within their own landscape collection, which some of you might know, fantastic collection, and looking in particular at weather. They did a lot of workshops and audience responses on weather, which this painting just, you can just write books about the rainbow and the skies and the weather itself happening in this painting. And we were very lucky to be the second recipients, and we were quite keen that the painting come to Ipswich in 2015 because it was the bicentenary of two of Ipswich's most significant paintings that we have in our collection here, which are the flower and kitchen garden paintings produced by John Constable in 1815. And we wanted to be able to show our two most significant works, very early works by Constable, and very personal paintings of his, the place that he was born. They were produced as a view from the back of East Bergholt House, which was where he was born. And they were views that he knew very intimately, and these paintings remained with him throughout his life. And then contrast that to show it with a work that he produced much later in his life, in 1831, that was produced in 6-foot scale for much more about a public consumption. So he was producing it to be shown at the Royal Academy, and to basically show his art and what he'd already mastered and the techniques, and be very much a public piece for consumption by audiences. So we were keen to get this painting here in 2015, and then this would really unlock our kind of whole year focusing on Constable and the collection here in Ipswich. So, as the run-up to that, we thought about having the painting here in 2015, that we would look to do 3 different displays, but this painting as the core of that overall display. So when it arrived in February this year, much to everybody's great excitement, we showed the painting alongside our permanent collection, which we have here in the Wolsey Art Gallery. And Ipswich's strengths in the Constable collection are very much in his early years. So we're able to talk about the artist and his family, for example, and the importance that they played within his life. You know, his father Golding and his mother Anne, who was very instrumental in introducing him to early kind of mentors and patrons, and his brother Abram, who was of course the younger brother, but the one who took on the family business and in some ways enabled the young John Constable, who was obsessed with being an artist, and that's what he wanted to be. He didn't want to be running the family business. So fortunately, his younger brother took on that business, and that freed up John to be able to go to the Royal Academy and study in 1799. So we're able to tell that kind of family story and also show it alongside our works of life drawings and portraits, because of course landscape painting back in John Constable's time, and the landscape painting that he was doing and interested in, wasn't the one, you know, to be seen as the kind of shining example of painting. You know, people very much wanted portraits, you know, or historical painting. It wasn't landscape, and particularly Suffolk landscape. You know, they might go to the Lake District, for example, but they weren't necessarily coming to paint the Suffolk landscape. And so we're able to show his portraits that he produced, and also our prints and drawings as well, because drawing very much formed a part of who he became as an artist. So we showed Salisbury Cathedral within our own permanent collection up until the summer this year. And then the summer, we concentrated very much on the flower and kitchen garden paintings because they were painted in the summer of 1815. And so we were keen that their special exhibition would be shown over the summer. And and we would have this kind of, you know, launch of a kind of summer garden party, really, for John Constable. So as part of the preparation for the summer exhibition focusing on the flower and kitchen gardens, I spent a lot of time in this building, which doesn't look very particularly, you know, interesting, and you might think, wow. But it's the Yale Centre for British Art in New Haven, and it contains an amazing collection of British art, even if it is in America. You know, it just seems a bit strange sometimes to say to people you need to go to New Haven to study Constable, but so be it. And their particular strengths are in 18th century art, but also works by Constable, for example. And it's part of the university at Yale. And the collection really came about through Paul Mellon, who was a great art collector. His specialisms were in, he had a passion for horses. So one of his first paintings that he acquired for his own collection was by Stubbs, of course, and the great horse painter. And again, within his collection, there are a lot of horsey art that you come across. And the collection at Yale houses about over 2,000 paintings, 20,000 drawings, you know, 35,000 prints, 35,000 rare books and manuscripts. So it's quite extensive. And I was fortunate enough to be given the Andrew W. Mellon Scholarship, which is a scholarship awarded to curators outside of London who are keen to study a particular British art subject. and for a month they put you up at Yale to study your particular subject, basically, which is a rare occasion for a curator in quite a wide-ranging collection here, which, you know, it's everything from kind of 15th century art to, you know, the present day. So just to study one thing for a month, well, yeah, I wasn't going to say no to that. They do have a fantastic collection, and this one here is by Paul Sandby, who was a watercolourist, and it's of Christ Church Mansion, so I'm sure some of you recognise. There's no sort of tea shop sign or anything there, but the pond's there, and you know, it's quite similar to the one that we have here on display in the hallway actually as well. And as well as images of home, they had works by George Frost, who was an early mentor to John Constable, and this one of the Cornhill and Moot Hall here in Ipswich. Again, we have a good collection of works by George Frost here in Ipswich, so it was wonderful to be able to see this kind of work over in Yale. And of course, I was saying their kind of specialism is 18th century art, so it would be very rude if they didn't have any Gainsborough work, and they have a really lovely selection of works by Thomas Gainsborough. Again, you know, Constable was very much influenced by Gainsborough, and there's that famous, you know, quote that he says when he comes to Ipswich, he sees a Gainsborough in every hedge and hollow tree. And he consulted George Frost, who, you know, was a collector of Gainsborough's work. So he was influenced by Gainsborough. And Gainsborough, who lived in Ipswich, this is a portrait of the Grosvenor family. And the Grosvenor was an apothecary and sort of politician here in Ipswich. And this was painted in about 1754. And of course, Gainsborough is known for his portraits, but it's actually his landscapes that he loved to paint. And so you can already start to tell that in the landscape behind the people. You know, he sort of painted the people. They're quite stiff, sort of looking. And but it's the landscape. You can already see in the sky and the tree, that's what he's really interested in. But a nice example to be able to see that as well. And Munnings, Alfred Munnings, of course, Paul Mellon, very much interested in horses, and so, you know, of course he collected Alfred Munnings. Again, another local boy. He probably wouldn't have liked me to call him that. Paul Mellon seems to have been very interested in Constable's skies, which of course is very relevant to Salisbury. And so there are a number of sky studies, as well as set pieces like Hadley Castle. And Hadley Castle is a very interesting painting when you compare it to Salisbury Cathedral from the Meadows, actually, because he visited Hadley in 1814, and he writes to his wife to-be, because they didn't marry until 1816. He writes to Maria about visiting Hadley Castle and how it's, you know, this wonderful landscape and ruin. But he doesn't go back to actually paint it up into, you know, much larger format until about 1829. And as well, many of you will know that by 1828, the love of his life, Maria Bicknell, had unfortunately passed away with tuberculosis. And this was a woman he courted for a number of years. You know, it was a long, drawn-out courtship, and he wasn't able to marry her until 1816. And she passed away in 1828 after 7 children, which, you know, I'm sure that had its toll. So Hadley Castle, I think, is really interesting to look at when looking at Salisbury, because 1829 he was visiting Salisbury, still very much in grief for his wife and grieving for her loss. And it was on the suggestion of his close friend John Fisher, who was the archdeacon, His uncle, Bishop Fisher, was the Bishop of Salisbury. It was on his suggestion that Constable come to Salisbury to kind of work, just spend time there. It was a place that he loved very much, and paint. What better subject, John Fisher was saying, than the cathedral, that he could spend time painting at this difficult time. And it was interesting to look at something like Hadley Castle, which has this very much ruinous landscape, dramatic weather in it. So he paints Hadley Castle before and then goes on to start to sketch Salisbury in the same year that he's, produced such a kind of ruinous and romantic landscape already there. And in the Yale collection, they also have one of these sketches from his time at Salisbury in 1829, when he was starting to think about this subject of, the cathedral and the church under the cloud, as Fisher puts it. What better subject than the church under a cloud? And so he's there sketching very much, the cathedral and the landscape. So it was lovely to be able to see, one of those sketches up close in Yale. And of course, a rainbow. I just put that in because I liked it. But again, they have this wide-ranging collection there. But I had to focus very much on East Bergholt because that's where the garden paintings, depict. And that's what I was keen to look at, because I think you have to look very much at an artist's early life, really, to understand how they can then create something, on this scale. You have to understand that kind of basic training almost that he was doing here in Suffolk. He wasn't attending art college, as it were. He was out in the landscape. That was his college, basically. And so this is East Bergholt, and apologies, is a bit fuzzy, but it sort of gives you a bit of perspective on. This is East Bergholt House, which was the Constable family home where he was born, and this is all Golding Constable's land that he would have seen, looking out the back of the house. And then you've got the rectory there for the church, where the love of Constable's life, Maria Bicknell, would stay with her maternal grandfather, the Dr. Rudd, who disapproved of them ever getting married because Constable was, not from it. Well, they were a well-off family, but there wasn't that kind of enough money for Dr. Rudd, obviously, and class issues and all sorts of things like that. And then West Lodge, which is another opposite, it would have been opposite the family home, and a place where Constable painted a number of views from that particular house as well. So I thought that would just give you an idea if you didn't know East Bergholt. And the Constable house is no longer there, so you can't necessarily get those views, as it were, now. And Golding, this is the artist's father, Golding Constable, here. And this is a painting that was actually started in 1815 as well, because John was spending a lot of time that summer in East Bergholt with his father, because unfortunately his mother had passed away, and she actually collapsed in the flower garden. I think it's his brother who writes to him and says mother was attacked, and meaning she was like attacked with some sort of seizure or something, and collapsed in the flower garden when she was out working. And although John had been at the family home earlier in the year with her to check, how she was feeling and things, he returned to London. Unfortunately, she passed away when he was back in London, and he didn't attend the funeral, which I think is quite a significant thing, although you have to think it wasn't like he just hopped on a train and got here in less than an hour from London. But I think it's significant in why he then goes on to paint the flowering kitchen garden in such exquisite detail and worked up. They're not just oil sketches as such, you know. Because he was never at his mother's funeral, they become very much, again, a way that he works through his grief for her, the flower garden in particular, with the cloud that is cast across. And again, that's something that you need to think about when looking at, you know, even the later work, which was produced after his wife's death. You have to start to think about the kind of meaning behind the clouds, you know, the sky, why the rainbow is there. He hasn't just put them there just for pretty effect, you know. There's very much always about feeling in his art, and he said it himself, he wrote it himself, that painting is for him another word for feeling, and that very much comes across. So this painting, as I said, was produced in 1815 when he went back to East Bergholt for the long summer, and it was probably the long last summer that he spent in Suffolk, because then his father died in 1816, and he subsequently married Maria Bicknell on October the 2nd, actually, so their wedding anniversary date has just gone. Then he really didn't come back to Suffolk on such long, drawn-out occasions. The family home, where those paintings are from, was demolished in 1840, but it was sold in 1819. So, you know, the family were no longer at that home, and there wasn't a reason to keep coming back to Suffolk without his mother and his father still there, you know, for those kind of long summers. But he certainly did return. But I think 1815 is really kind of a pivotal moment for him in his career and his personal development, and, you know, kind of making a break from those long summers in Suffolk sketching to re-establishing himself in places like in London and, you know, and showing at the Royal Academy. And so one of the things I came across in Yale within their collection wasn't in the paintings collection, and it wasn't classed in the drawings collection. You know, when I was doing all these searches, it was actually in the kind of manuscripts and rare books division, and you have to kind of wade your way through all these things before you find little gems. And I was obviously particularly interested in anything that was to do with East Bergholt, and I came across C.R. Leslie's biography of Constable. Now, he was the first, he was a friend of Constable's and an artist himself, C.R. Leslie, and he was the person who would first write Constable's biography, and is very much quoted because it has a lot of, you know, correspondence and information in there about Constable's life and about how he worked and who he was. And this book in the Yale collection is an annotated version of C.R. Leslie's biography. So it has within it not just the text, but a number of pictures, original artworks by Constable himself, prints, letters. It's a real treasure trove of kind of, you know, bits that are stuck in there. You keep looking and thinking, oh wow, look, there's another letter by Constable, or you know, and a number of prints as well that are signed, and all sorts of things in there. I just thought I'd include these two portraits in there because Leslie included a number of other artists' portraits that are in there as an indication of people who Constable admired and you know, influenced or worked alongside. And so within the book is Turner and Gainsborough, and I think there's always the Turner Constable issue always seems to be debated and bandied about, but actually, you know, they were still professional enough to be, you know, consult with one another, and I think, and having that included within his own biography, you know, is interesting. But what was even more interesting was the fact that there was a letter within it that contained the earliest known garden view. So this is the earliest known view of the constable's gardens, basically, to show that in 1797 he was writing to a friend, J.T. Smith, who was an artist who helped Constable early on, and he was an artist who sort of mentored him in a way. J.T. Smith. He also worked at the British Museum. He was quite an interesting character, and his nickname was Antiquity Smith. So he was, a kind of antiquarian, as it were. Anyway, he was asking Constable a lot for depictions of cottages and ruined sort of cottages, because that's what he then produced a work on, was kind of picturesque cottages. And in this letter to his friend, J.T. Smith, Constable has just doodled at the bottom almost a view from my window, and it's the threshing barn that is within the Flowering Kitchen Garden paintings. So this was wonderful to find this view in 1797, just kind of tucked away in this book, because from the catalogue of the book, it didn't tell me what was going to be in it. So I wasn't, aware that it was in there. And then, it was perfect to be able to see it. Unfortunately, it was going to be a bit too difficult to bring it across from America for the exhibition, but at least we were able to kind of reference it. And from there, that really helped me to start build up a picture then of, chronologically, I went through all of Constable's works that then looked at East Bergholt in particular, and views from the house that he was born in, from the front and the back. And I started to just put them all together as kind of a picture gallery, so that I could start to form a much better idea of, what he was looking at. And actually, when you start to put them all together chronologically, for those that you have images of, it starts to form a really interesting context to the artist's life. And this is a view, again, of East Bergholt, but down towards John Dunthorne's house, which some of you may know, but John Dunthorne was, again, another local chap who kind of mentored the young Constable. He was a bit of a handy man, glazier, painter, a bit of this, bit of that. Perhaps an early Essex boy, I don't know, sort of Suffolk Essex boy. And there aren't many paintings securely attributed to him, John Dunthorne, now, but we have one in the Colchester collection that we've had on display here. And so this is just a lovely depiction of the kind of village and down towards his friend's house. And the East Bergholt Common, there were a number of early oils of the common and activity that was happening on the common itself, and just the general kind of landscapes. And it's a terrible image, sorry, but it's actually a rainbow over East Bergholt Common, which again, you start to think about these motifs which are used, for the great works like Salisbury, but they go all the way back to, his very early days, 1803. This is in the Royal Albert Museum is that Exeter, I think, isn't it? Which again, I kind of toyed with borrowing, but well, we ran out of time. And the landscape at East Bergholt, 1805, which this was in the Yale collection. There are a number of kind of watercolours and, kind of sketches where he's very much out in the landscape. And I always think that the landscape, being out in it, was his training ground. And these start to become kind of perfect examples of that. And another subject that again is worth bearing in mind is his depiction of East Bergholt Church. This was the the first church that he really took to, doing many sketches of, many watercolours, and you start to get a feeling of his relation with the church, which becomes, again, very important when you start to think about his depiction of Salisbury Cathedral from the Meadows. East Bergholt Church, I don't know if any of you have been there, but was very much a family church for the constables. They had their pew there, and his parents are buried within the churchyard. And importantly, it would have more than likely perhaps been the first place that he would have set eyes on Maria Bicknell, who was to be, his wife, as the Reverend Rudd was perhaps preaching a sermon there. So it was always somewhere he was drawn back to depicting. And at the sort of similar time, not only is he producing these views of the church itself and the architecture, but he's starting to get sneaky glimpses out the back of his house towards the rectory, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the place where his love would generally go and stay. It's thought that they didn't meet until 1809, but this is about the earliest view towards the rectory out of the back of the constable house. It's quite funny, isn't it, when you think about it? Is this kind of adolescent, sort of peek? Well, he wasn't an adolescent, but he was, peeking out the back of the church at your potential girlfriend, isn't it? So, so this is a view, early view towards the rectory. And then back to the church again. And I think when you start to plot them all together, and I've missed a few out because we would be here for a long time, you start to notice his obsessive nature as well, of being drawn to these certain subjects again and again and again. And it's this being out in the landscape and repeatedly, drawing the same subjects or focusing on particular landscapes that then builds up his ability to become this, artist and produce this work. But this is East, because I haven't even shown you a picture of the house yet, even though I've talked about the flower and kitchen gardens, and we've looked at views out of the house. But this is a little sketch of the house itself, the family home. And this one is of East Bergholt House again, but it was discovered on the back of another painting, so that's why it's not terrible. It was quite badly damaged there. And this is a much better view that I can kind of talk about. And the family home was built specifically for them, and they moved in 1774, and then John was born there in 1776. And there's quite a good description of it, as I say, that they sold it later on in 1819, and they were preparing an advert for the paper when they were selling it. So it describes the house really well. To be sold in the delightful, pleasant village of East Bergholt, a capital brick mansion freehold with about 37 acres of land, pasture and arable in excellent condition, communicating with excellent roads. There's a lot of excellence in this. The mansion consists of 4 very good rooms and spacious entrance hall on the ground floor, 4 excellent sleeping rooms with light closets, whatever that means, and spacious landing on the second floor, 4 exceedingly good attics, most capital cellars for your wine, maybe, and offices, brick stables and coach house, and every convenience that can be thought of. So it was a very nice house, they're sort of selling it quite well there, particularly with the attics and the cellars. So unfortunately, as I say, the house itself was demolished, and all that really remains are some sort of outbuildings, remnants of the stables, and some of the outer railings. So if you go to East Bergholt now, you wouldn't be able to see the family home. And there's no formal formal painting of the house produced by Constable, even though he talks about it with great significance, and the place, you know, the place and the area being very much the birthplace of who he would become. But there's no actual sort of formalised house painting, as it were. But it does become, the East Bergholt house does become the front to his English landscape series, which I think is quite significant, because he makes reference very much to his birthplace, you know, being the birth of his art. So, and another good example of the house and a further distance view. And this is the back, by the way, I should say. This isn't the front, so this is the back view. Again, leading up towards the back of the house there. But it was always the views out of the house which have much more kind of interest, I suppose. And again, we're looking towards the rectory. I think he's got a real longing for this girl, hasn't he? It's a sunrise as well, and this is actually in Philadelphia, this painting. That looks out, and you know, it's quite an early work, but you've got the skies, his interest in the sky, the sunrise, in September it was. And we do get views out the front of the house, so he wasn't just looking towards the rectory all the time, although a lot of that time. But towards the front of the house, you get his views on village life, and towards his neighbours, this is West Lodge. The constable's friend Sarah Roberts lived there, and she talks very much about that Constable used to come round and then, you know, be quite pleasant, but actually all he wanted was to go round the back of her house and do these pictures of, you know, the sunrise and the sunset. So I don't think he was that much into socialising, but he knew a good view. So this is his earliest double rainbow, is in the East Bergholt. So, you know, again, the rainbow, the skies, they're all things he's very, very interested in. And it's lovely, this painting, with having the windmill in there as well. You know, the windmill that he could have ended up working at, but didn't, as he strived on to be an artist. And we were able to borrow this from the V&A for the exhibition in the summer, so I was quite pleased to do that. And then more views out towards the common. And I want to just mention, I'm not going to talk too much about these, but I just want to mention the sketchbooks, which I think are really interesting to look at, because they're his kind of visual diaries. His sketchbooks and his sketches become very much his source material, which he might have produced these in 1813, 15, but he's still using that source material in, you know, 1830s. He's still using elements of the cart and the horses and things that he sketched in Suffolk in his early days in his late work. He wasn't necessarily in Suffolk, but he still had this kind of rich background and material. And the sketchbooks are very small as well, you know, they're those kind of sketchbooks, but they're just beautiful visual diaries, basically. I'll just flick through a few of those. Some of towards the house, and, you know, he's just little penciling little landscapes in here, there, and the windmill there, which is, and the house itself, but at night and in day, and also during sort of 1814, 15, while I was at Yale, I came across that in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, that they have this painting of the Stour Valley and Dedham Church. And I thought, oh, it'd be great, you know, to go and see that at the same time. You know, while I'm in America, I may as well get on a train and go and see this. And so I was able to go and see this painting, which is interesting in looking at as a kind of contrast to the Flower and Kitchen Gardens, which were personal paintings to him. this was a commission for a wedding present. The bride was from East Berkholt. He knew her, and it was going to be a present for her at her wedding. And so he produces this beautiful kind of overview of the landscape, places she would know, she could reflect on when she was in wedded bliss. And in the big thing in it is this huge dung pile, which is like, basically manure. These guys are just shoveling into this cart. But he doesn't, it's a wedding present, and here's a big pile of, but it wasn't meant to be like that. It was supposed, I guess, to signify fertility, all sorts of things. There's lots of things that you could, but it was just an activity, that's happening here, and she would know about this in the landscape. And they were known as, these kind of big heaps of, dung were known as run-over dungles. That was the kind of Suffolk expression for them. So, interesting that you might get that on your wedding day. But again, interesting to look at a kind of commissioned piece rather than something he would have just painted for himself or his family. And also within the same year of 1815, he was very much travelling in this area. So he was off looking at Framlingham Castle, for example, and sketching Fram and on all these places. He had another commission for to paint Brightwell Church, which some of you may well know. And so while he was travelling to paint Brightwell Church as a commission, he could stop in Woodbridge and Framlingham and all these places and still be sketching. But also during that summer, it was a very productive summer. And at one point, I think even Maria writes to him and says, I haven't had any letters for a very long time, because they corresponded all the time. And he has to say to her, well, landscape is my mistress, So landscape was always a close sort of second call to Maria. And he is producing these two works, the Flower and Kitchen Garden, at slightly different times, July and August, it's thought. So they're also being worked up. And I just thought, again, I include this as the preparatory sketch from the V&A collection, which shows you the flower garden, which is this bit, actually, which is quite overgrown and it's got a lot more sort of foliage around it. And actually in the finished, in the painting, you'll note that the garden has now been very much kind of, you've got this laying out of arrangement of the flowers, and, all of that foliage has been very much stripped back. So I would have thought that Anne, his mother, would have been instrumental in planning that kind of garden, basically. And we were able to have the preparatory sketch on display alongside the Flower and Kitchen Garden paintings when we first opened the gallery. So that was, quite an exciting opportunity to have that drawing back here and to show them all alongside each other. And I just would include also, we were able to borrow 2 other garden views for the exhibition in the summer, because I wanted to highlight that Constable was very much, always just kind of looking out on his own landscape, and those places that he loved, the places that he had a real feeling for, were the ones that you get that very much in the paintings that you then see now. And this is Hampstead, which again was another important place for Constable and his family. Here in 1821, this is his, the view from his family home. Well, by then he'd married Maria Bicknell and had a number of children with her, and was very much a kind of father and a husband. And his interest was particularly, he writes to his friend John Fisher that he's been out skying, and that he's produced a number of sky studies. He's looking at Hampstead skies, you know, at Hampstead Heath, you've got these fabulous skies. And so he's out there, but he is also still just depicting the view out of his window as, you know, it's easy material for him. Even the washing, I love that. But as a family man, you're going to have washing, probably a lot of it. And Salisbury in 1829, when he's back there thinking about this subject, you know, his grief for his wife, his whole kind of relationship with his best friend John Fisher, you know, he's there considering this subject to work it up, something that will kind of be the culmination of his art. And he's still there painting the view out of the Archdeacon's house, you know, just taking the normal view. And that would have been the last time that he would go to Salisbury in 1829. He would then produce the Salisbury Cathedral from the meadows. Unfortunately, John Fisher died in 1832, so he didn't go back to Salisbury after that. But we were able to get these two smaller views to show in the gallery as well. And so when I was talking about feeling earlier, I was just trying to highlight how important the constable believed that, you know, he wasn't just painting a particular subject, you know, his feelings and emotion went very much into the painting as well. And I think that's what resonates, you know, through the years for many different artists who have then been inspired, you know, by his work. And so for the last part of our year here in Ipswich, it occurred to me when I was sitting in Yale that we, you know, rather than just do the summer exhibition with the flower and kitchen gardens, we should look at Constable's impact on other artists. And in particular, I thought it might be good for people to think about somebody like Lucian Freud, because they might not necessarily associate him with a landscape painter or a historical landscape painter like Constable. But actually Freud came to the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing at Dedham and was thought to set fire to it accidentally with a cigarette butt, but yeah, it's always a bit of hearsay on that. And so he came very much as an early artist to the same training ground, if you want to call it that in a way, the same area, the same landscape that Constable was using, you know, as his kind of training ground. And this is a painting actually of the Young Freud by Cedric Morris, who was the founder of the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing in Dedham. And another notable student there, of course, is Maggie Hambling, and she also attended the school. But I think Freud then later, he went on, he collected Constable work, actually. He had a work in his collection by Constable, and also produced an exhibition that was in Paris, you know, of works, you know, which explained his kind of interest in Constable, and curated that display as well, and produced an etching of a Constable elm, which is in the V&A collection. So he had these kind of connections, and I think for him, he was interested again in Constable's kind of emotional resonance and kind of intense scrutiny of the landscape and that kind of direct observation of it, which you can see in, well, the big Freud nude at the back there, and also the self-portrait as well of Freud. And this is just an example from the Tate collection, again, of he did these quite detailed studies of plants, which I thought most people wouldn't perhaps know, because they know Freud perhaps wore the nudes, you know, in the large-scale nudes. So I just include that there. And I really want to, so this part of the exhibition will then run until the end of January next year. And I just thought it would be nice to conclude on this quote from Wordsworth, because again, Constable was very much interested in poetry. He would often include texts with his work, and certainly with his prints. and I thought this was a nice way of kind of summing up. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began, so is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, the child is father of the man. And I think, as I was saying before, those early years are the ones that have the most impact for us as adults. Thank you. Any questions?